For my senior research project, I focused on male and female student athletes' perception of opposite gender sexual harassment. Sexual harassment is a widespread problem that has a long-standing history. It is prevalent in educational institutions and athletic settings, as well as the workplace and other public environments. Individuals in educational institutions, as well as athletes, have an increased likelihood of being sexually harassed. Sexual harassment contains dehumanizing and disempowering qualities that can have significant psychological, social, and physical impacts on individuals. Sexual harassment is a complex phenomenon that includes a continuum of behaviors, but individual perceptions are based on many contextual and individual factors. This means that people have different definitions of what behaviors constitute sexual harassment. This makes it important to look into how students understand sexual harassment in order to determine ways to implement informative and preventative programs and create an all-inclusive definition. The Department of Education and the Equal Employment Opportunity Committee attempt to encapsulate each individual's understanding of sexual harassment by defining it as unwelcome sexual advances, sexual assault, dating violence, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical harassment of a sexual nature. Women tend to find more behaviors to be sexually harassing compared to men, and those who have experienced these behaviors are more likely to view ambiguous circumstances as more harassing. Both males and females tend to perceive behaviors as sexually harassing if the harasser is of a higher status, and males tend to not label behaviors as sexually harassing if the victim is a male. The difference in perception is likely due to the idea that sexual harassment has become normative behavior and cultural standards differ among males and females within society. The hypothesis proposed in this study was that when presented with sexual harassment scenarios, female student athletes will identify more scenarios as sexually harassing as opposed to males, and male student athletes will identify more scenarios as being appropriate compared to females, regardless of the gender of the harasser. The participants in this study included 26 male and 51 female student athletes at a Catholic liberal arts university. They were between the ages of 18 and 32, and their grade level varied from freshman to graduate student. Some of the materials used in conducting the study were a modified and updated version of a sexual harassment self-report vignette survey completed by Bursick in 1992, female to male and male to female equal power sexual harassment scenarios, Qualtrics, which is a program that allows people to create and distribute surveys, and a set of 5 corresponding Likert scale questions that follow each vignette and address things such as appropriateness, personal space, comfortability, performance in class, extracurricular activity, and whether the interaction is an example of sexual harassment. In terms of the procedure, it was through strategized random sampling that the male and female students were assigned to one of the 2 conditions. They were then presented with a demographic questionnaire, and after reading each vignette, the participants were asked to respond to 5 7-point Likert scale style questions. Following completion, the participants were presented with a debriefing and contact information to the university's counseling center. So here's one of the vignettes from the male to female sexual harassment condition. I wanted to show you what a scenario looks like and what a question looks like. So here's a scenario, and the question was how appropriate was the harasser's behavior, and the Likert scale ranged from very appropriate to very inappropriate. So in terms of the results, please make note that the figures presented here and on the next slide represent the findings, but they make the differences appear as though they are larger than they actually are. Also, condition 1 indicates female harassers and condition 2 indicates male harassers. So for appropriateness, the gender of the respondent was marginally significant with a P of 0.061, and females identified more scenarios as inappropriate with a mean score of 5.494 than males with a mean score of 5.062. There were no significant main effects of the harasser's gender on the appropriateness rating, and non-significant interaction effects between gender of the respondent and gender of the harasser. In terms of harassment ratings, the gender of the respondent was significant with a p-value of 0.003. Females also identified more scenarios as sexually harassing with a mean score of 4.99 than males with a mean score of 4.19. And there were no significant main effects of the harasser's gender on the rating of harassment, and there were non-significant interaction effects between gender of the respondent and gender of the harasser. So what does this mean? It means that there were gender differences between the participants, that the gender of the harasser did not have an impact on the participants' interpretation of the behavior, and female respondents were more likely to rate higher on the level of sexual harassment and inappropriateness than male respondents in both conditions, meaning that female respondents were more likely to rate higher on these behaviors regardless of whether the harasser was male or female. In terms of implications, altering vignettes to include power differentials between harasser and victim, altering the vignettes to include interactions and settings more familiar with the student athletes, and including dichotomous questions in order to prevent ambiguity could all help in finding accurate responses from the athletes. There is no room for gray area here. Some potential limitations that could affect the results of this study include the COVID-19 virus, which has resulted in a worldwide pandemic and has impacted students directly in that their normal school routine has been altered. They are unable to fully engage in extracurriculars and utilize the amenities that often aid in stress relief that are offered by most schools of higher education. These unforeseen circumstances have also had an impact on the mental health of students. Also, there was a potential for ambiguity because of the Likert scale style questions. They included 7 points ranging from very appropriate to very inappropriate, or very comfortable to very uncomfortable, which could mean that there is not certainty in whether the behaviors were appropriate or sexually harassing. Also, we only looked at male to female and female to male equal power harassment. Some future directions that this type of study could go is to consider other variables such as race or age of the participant in terms of their responses, include dichotomous yes or no questions, and also present vignettes that are more relatable to the athletes and that have power differentials between the harasser and victim. So what this could look like is coach to athlete or athlete to athlete harassment, and having the scenarios in a familiar situation to the athletes, like having it set in a locker room or a gym or even the playing field. Finally, I just wanted to say thank you to all of the participants and to Dr. Mindy Coral for her guidance and support.